Hi, my name is Margaret Forsland, and most of the year I live in the classic 21st century American culture, but every summer I venture off into the woods near the Columbia River Gorge, and I visit a place called Arrowhead Girl Scout Camp, where everyone calls me Woof, and I drive an invisible car. It's pretty sweet. When did you become a member of this subculture? I became a member of the resident camp subculture at approximately 3:17 p.m. on June 20th, 2009 at the Arrowhead Open House, where I was asked what my camp name was, and I said, "Woof." What are the most valued things in your subculture? In the camp world, community is really the glue that holds everything together, and when that community bond that it starts during pre-camp before all the kids show up, and you've just got your staff who are usually relatively broke college students, high school graduates, random older people that just don't want to move on because honestly, camp is more fun than real life anyway. And you kind of find the glue that bonds everyone. One year it was the KFC, I think it is, Double Down, and talking about this sandwich that is made of two pieces of chicken with a burger in between it. I don't know. And lumberjack prom, that was a big thing one year. But there are these little concepts that really bond the entire community into this one united force. And that force is what makes camp magic. And camp magic is this concept of how nothing goes terribly wrong at camp. I mean, it does, but the kids never know that. And when it does go terribly wrong at camp, usually the staff rallies together, and it's this huge push that, like, you can survive, give it a week, and it won't be there anymore. Um, Time is this really weird thing when you get brand new people in your community every week, and you lose people every week. So you're like, I can't plan more than a week of my life at a time because next week I will have new kids. Which is actually really nice because sometimes you have really terrible kids and you're like, great, a week, I just have to make it to Friday. And then other weeks you're like, no, why do my children have to leave? And you're like crying in the corner and everyone's like, it's okay. Your kids were awesome. I'm super jealous. Um, and in that, trust is a really big thing too. I mean, parents leave their kids at camp. They trust you for a week to take care of them and be parents to them on some level. I mean, it's different with every group, and but the trust is still always there. And the trust has to be there between the admin staff and the counselors because every 10 minutes you're improvising. Nothing ever goes exactly to plan, so you have to constantly be ready to just jump in and do what you have to. So there has to be a lot of trust there. There has to be a lot of trust between you and your co-counselor because there's usually 2 or 3 counselors to every unit of 8 to, I think 16 was the biggest we had, 8 to 16 girls. And you gotta have each other's back. And that sense of community and that sense of trust is really, really important to keeping us all emotionally safe. Physical emotional safety are really valued in our subculture. One of my bosses early in my career drilled it into your brain that your number one priority was the physical and emotional safety of your kids. And with that, you can't be guardians of their physical and emotional safety if you aren't physically and emotionally safe. So that's a lot of where that community comes in as well. What traditions do you have? For one, there's a misconception that all camps are the same, which they're not. So, I mean, my camp may have one tradition, but Whispering Winds, which is a camp within the same cluster of Girl Scouts of Oregon in Southwest Washington, as Arrowhead, where I live, and yes, I do live there, and they have different traditions than we do. They're kind of more horse camp based, and we're kind of more go hike a mountain based. So every camp has their own traditions. Our traditions include climbing mountains every week. We have Dog Mountain in the Columbia River Gorge and Wind Mountain, which hopefully will be back after the terrible windstorm there last winter. Trail now looks kind of interesting. But we're all about challenging our girls to climb to the stars or climb out of bed, really. Got a lovely song about climbing. Also among our traditions are the reading of the I Like You book, which is this adorable little red book that's about that big, about all the ways you can like someone, and we sit around in a circle and we pass the book around and everyone reads a page, and you tell the people on either side of you why you like them, and that can be as in-depth as, I've never met you, but I like your watch, and they're like, I hate my watch, that actually happens. Or as in-depth as, especially when you have two staff members sitting next to each other, this really deep, connected, you're my best friend, I trust you beyond anything I would trust anyone in real life, and I've only known you for 3 weeks. So we have a lot of community enforcers like that. We have the Tadger story, which is the Priest Moore's story. It involves hopping on one foot and dancing around in a circle, sometimes around a fire pit. It's a little ritualistic, but it's pretty cool. That's basically it for like major traditions. There are some less formal ones. We used to be really big into giving all the counselors in training a big sister, so someone else on staff that they can look up to. And as my big sister told me, someone who's looking out for you first. Whereas the CIT director, your counselor training director, is looking out for all of you equally. There's someone who can be like, hey, I'm that person's person, and I'm going to make sure that they get the best of things. So that was a really big tradition at Arrowhead for a long time. It's kind of died out over the years, in part because we have way more CITs than we once did, and it's become logistically really difficult to get together for these big sister, little sister meetings on a weekly basis because all the big sisters have kids. And so they're like, but my co and I are big sisters. What are we supposed to do with the 11 kids that they're actually paying us to watch out for? So from that perspective, that tradition's kind of died out. There are a lot of this counselor and training traditions that aren't as big as they used to be, which is unfortunate, but the way camp is evolving and growing, it might actually be for the better. Camp is a really transient place, and if all of one previous old staff goes, then a new staff replaces them and no one knows the old traditions. So it's kind of an oral tradition from that perspective. A lot of our songs are an oral tradition. They're passed on between us, and you may be able to look some of them up on YouTube, but that doesn't mean that they were sung the way they were sung at your camp. So not all camps are the same from any perspective. It's really interesting to go from camp to camp and see those differences. How does my subculture express its beliefs? It's really interesting because our beliefs are really ranging, and from some perspective, as staff members, we're not really even supposed to express any beliefs in much of anything besides the kids first, as far as our individual beliefs go, because this is about the kids. And from that perspective, we express that it's about the kids by making it about the kids. Your personal time as staff is your 2-hour break when you get to be an adult with adults, theoretically with adults. Sometimes you're an adult on your own and you're like, okay, I'm going to sleep through my break. So it's a little bit different for everyone from that perspective. But we've got a huge kid focus. We've got a huge fun focus. And a huge yes focus. And most of how we express ourselves is through doing things and through being active parts of this community. So, like when we teach archery for the fun and yes base of this whole thing, instead of saying don't point your arrow at your friend, you say we only point the arrow downrange. You avoid your negative wording there. And you try and make everything as fun as possible. You act a little bit silly. You let your kids dress you up in the costume box, even though you know for a fact that everything is crazy in there and it's been worn by every other counselor all summer long. They do get washed, I assure you. But everything is really action based and really positive, and we're all about putting each other up and helping each other out. Everything through actions. How does the subculture coexist with American culture? It's really interesting because on day one you get these kids and they have certain expectations of you as, oh, you're other Americans. We theoretically come from similar locations in the country. Um, they have certain expectations of you, but what you do is basically throw those upside down. Because at camp we're a very yes focused place. We're a very positive place. There's no bullying at camp. People are very nice to each other, even if they don't like each other, because it's not about you, it's about the kids. And it's huge focus on the kids. As adults, it's really hard to be who you are at camp in real life because the world runs you over. And a lot of us, at least those of us who went through counselor training programs or things like that when we were 16 or 17, you come out of this entire summer of being this other person who's really enthusiastic, who always gets to say yes, who always gets said yes to, who doesn't do sarcasm very often, and is this very happy and general person. I don't know very many people who aren't happy at camp, and if they aren't happy at camp, they should go home, because camp is a place to be happy. But then you go home as a camp person, and you have to remember that the real world doesn't function like that. You can't always say yes in real life. You can't, there are people who don't play by the same rules as you. They're sarcastic and mean, and it hits you really hard that first summer when you come back. And you're like, but you're my parents, why are you being so mean to me? And then you realize that they're always like that. You're the one who has changed, and realize that there is a world out there where you always get your way because your way is the way of the whole group. And so from that perspective, it's really hard to transition from this, like, we are really communal and we're always together, and when we do something together, it's for all of us, to this world where everyone has an ulterior motive and everyone kind of wants to do something for themselves, and I don't know. They don't really coexist in conclusion. They are two separate worlds, and one ends and then the other one begins. There is no overlap, really. I mean, I guess from time to time we as camp people get together in the real world, but I think it's more that we are just putting camp in Walmart parking lots, in parks, in people's houses. Camp isn't necessarily a physical place, it's a mentality.